A bride vanishes into the snow, leaving only whispers behind. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallo. Drop a comment. Where are you joining from? Your voices warm these cold mysteries, and I treasure them. It was one of those January mornings when the frost seems to have taken possession of London entirely, not merely coating the pavements with treacherous glass, but turning the very air into something hard and sharp. From the warmth of my armchair by the fire, I could look out into Whitehaven Mansion's courtyard and see the slow swirl of flakes drifting down with the deliberate elegance of feathers at a milliner's. Poirot was at his usual post at the breakfast table, sipping chocolate and reading Le Figaro. He had the air of one entirely impervious to the bleakness outside, his green silk dressing gown pristine, his patent leather slippers gleaming. He was deeply engrossed in an article, some political squabble in Paris, when there came a sharp knock at the door. The sound, brisk and peremptory, did not belong to the postman. "Eh bien, Hastings, if you would be so kind," Poirot murmured, without looking up. "It is doubtless for you. People rarely come to see me before I am properly attired." I obeyed, crossing to the door. Standing there was Inspector Japp, stamping snow from his boots and looking rather more rumpled than usual. His breath came in short puffs, and his hat was flecked with white. "Morning, Hastings," he said. "Poirot in?" "My dear Japp," came the voice from the breakfast table. "You have the aspect of a man who has walked from Calais without stopping for lunch. Come in, though not with those boots on my carpet, if you please." Japp managed a thin smile as he complied. "I suppose you haven't heard what's happened in Upper Highcombe?" Poirot looked up at that, his eyes narrowing. "Upper Highcombe, that is the village in Berkshire, where the snow lies deep in winter, is it not? A most inconvenient place for crime." Japp removed his gloves and dropped into the armchair opposite me. "It's the queerest business I've had in some time," he said. "A wedding at Highcombe Hall yesterday. High society. The bride a Miss Eleanor Grantham, the groom a certain Richard Penrith. Ceremony at 2 o'clock, and at 5 the bride had vanished. Gone without a word, without a note, and, this is the bit that'll interest you, left her wedding dress in a heap in the snow on the south lawn." "Mon Dieu!" Poirot set down his cup. "In the snow, you say?" "That is symbolic, Hastings. It speaks of something deliberate, something theatrical." "Symbolic or not, she hasn't been seen since," Japp went on. "The family are all in an uproar, naturally. The groom's threatening to tear Berkshire apart. The thing is, well, there are whispers. Some say she ran off of her own accord. Others mutter about abduction." "And you, mon cher Japp?" Poirot inquired softly. "What do you think?" Japp hesitated. "I think there's more to it than meets the eye. For one thing, the whole house was full of people who had a reason, one way or another, to want the wedding stopped. There's a stepbrother with money troubles, a bridesmaid who, so I'm told, was once in love with the groom, and an aunt who stood to inherit quite a bit if the marriage didn't take place." Poirot gave a small nod, his eyes brightening with the light of the hunt. "And the dress, abandoned in the snow, like a chrysalis without the butterfly. It is the act of a mind that wishes to be noticed, to create an impression. No, Hastings, this is not merely a young lady changing her mind." "Will you come down and look into it?" Japp asked. "The local constable's in over his head." Poirot rose, smoothed the front of his dressing gown, and said in a tone of solemn pleasure, "My dear Japp, I would not miss it for the world. Hastings, you will pack at once. We shall go into the snow." It was still falling when we reached Paddington later that morning, the flakes now large and soft, muting the sounds of the station. As the train pulled us toward Berkshire, I could not help picturing that strange and lonely image. A white gown crumpled in the snow, its wearer vanished, leaving behind only questions. And beside me, Poirot sat motionless, eyes half closed, already turning the affair over in his little grey cells. The train set us down in a world of white. Snow lay in clean, undisturbed sheets across the fields. Hedges softened into pale mounds, and the bare elms lining the drive to Highcombe Hall wore hoarfrost like an old soldier's decorations. The house itself, a long Georgian facade with a central pediment and a small balustraded terrace, rose from its drifted lawns with an air of affronted dignity, as if weddings might be mislaid elsewhere, but not in front of its symmetrical windows. Our cab wheels crunched, and our breath came out in little clouds. Poirot's moustaches seemed sharper in the cold. He drew his scarf more closely and surveyed the hall with a look that combined courtesy with something like amusement. We were received at once. A butler of the older school, thin, precise, his black coat without a speck of lint, admitted us to a marble-floored hall where a fire leapt bravely in a grate flanked by carved sphinxes. The air held a faint trace of lilies, and beneath it, something metallic and chill, as though the house itself remembered yesterday's commotion and had not yet warmed to forgetfulness. "Mr. Penrith is in the morning room with Miss Grantham's father," said the butler. "Inspector Japp telephoned ahead. Will you come this way, gentlemen?" We did so, our footsteps echoing. I saw, as one does in a house used recently for festivity, the small detritus of a celebration, a forgotten programme tucked half under a console table, a spray of ribbon caught round a newel post, a single white glove, drooping like a small deflated cloud from the arm of a chair. It gave me a queer feeling. The place had the air of a theatre after a performance in which the principal actor had refused the final bow. In the morning room, two men sprang up, a fair, clean-shaven fellow in a well-cut suit, whose eyes, bloodshot from a night without sleep, were fixed at once upon us, and a larger, older man with an anxious face and the complexion of one who has made friends with his port. The first was Richard Penrith, the bridegroom who had not been. The second, Mr. Ambrose Grantham, father to the vanished Eleanor. Penrith came forward with an eagerness that was almost a lunge. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm grateful you've come. The local police, they mean well, but they are tramping about making a frightful mess. She cannot simply have walked away. She would not do such a heartless, absurd, theatrical thing. Eleanor is, well, she is not frivolous." Poirot made him a bow of exquisite neatness. "You love mademoiselle, I see." His tone was not mocking, only certain. "I intend to marry her," he returned sharply. "At once. Today, if she is found." He checked himself and looked away. "When she is found." "Courage, monsieur," Poirot murmured, "and we shall find, if not her at once, at least the truth, which is a beginning." Mr. Grantham spoke then, husky and abrupt. "It is the damnedest thing. Pardon me. My daughter is not the sort to make a scene. If she had had the slightest hesitation, we should have talked. She is sensible. Yesterday, after the ceremony, there were photographs and toasts. At 5, she excused herself to go upstairs with her maid. She was to change her shoes, there was damp on the lawns, and in 10 minutes she was not to be found. At 5:30, a footman looking from the south terrace saw a white shape on the snow near the sundial. It was her dress, wadded like a ball. That is all." "Not all, I think," said Poirot gently. "There are always the people. If you please, Mr. Grantham, assemble in your library those who were most nearly concerned yesterday, the family, the intimate friends who stayed overnight, the attendant maid. We will make, as one says, the tour d'horizon." He turned to the window that gave upon the south lawns. The snow lay there broken only by a series of paths trampled by police and gardeners. Beyond, a clipped yew walk ran towards the sundial, its dark cones wearing caps of white. A faint grey haze hung above the trees. "Hastings," he said softly, "observe how the house looks at that lawn. It is a stage, n'est-ce pas? The windows are boxes, the terrace is the pit. Whoever placed the gown there wished very much that it should be seen. Presently we had our company. They came into the library, a long room of books and dark leather, with that peculiar mixture of reluctance and relief one observes when people feel both put upon and secretly grateful for someone to arrange their confusion into sense. First came Lady Evadne Halliford, Mr. Grantham's sister, a handsome woman in her late 50s, with narrowed eyes and a nervous line at the corner of her mouth. Her mourning grey silk was a shade too elaborate for mere auntship. One had the impression of a standard-bearer who had been obliged to retreat. She took a seat a little apart and crossed a foot with a flash of impatience. Then Jasper Grantham, the step-brother, dark, thin, with the peculiar pallor of a man who has spent too much time indoors at cards. He carried himself carelessly, and his smile, when it appeared, had something of the panther about it, courteous and edged. Miss Lydia Gray followed, the bridesmaid one had heard of, she who was said to have been in love with the groom. She was a young woman of that type, too often dismissed as mild. Fair hair coiled neatly, small features, a mouth that betrayed more determination than sweetness. She held her gloves tight, as though they might run away. Behind them came others. The best man, Colin Hartley, broad-shouldered, cheerful in the manner of those who fence discomfort with badinage. Mrs. Penrith, the groom's mother, tall, elegant, and faintly scornful of everything that was not her own control. The maid, Alice, a country girl with red fingers and eyes redder from crying. There were a few stragglers, the vicar's wife, who had stayed for the evening, a cousin of Miss Grantham's who had come down from Oxford, and last, a man whose presence seemed to draw a breath of draught through the room, despite the good fire. Mr. Lionel Vane, family solicitor and trustee to certain Grantham affairs. He had a languid way of speaking, as if he laid words down like cards and expected them to win. Poirot did not interrogate at once. He did what I have often seen him do with success. He arranged order. He moved a chair 2 inches, straightened a blotter, placed a pen level with the edge of the desk. It is absurd to say so, perhaps, but the temperature of the room seemed to change. Attention focused, mannered resentment gave way to watchfulness. When he spoke, it was in a tone of quiet that somehow left no space for complaint. "We are all distressed," he began, "and it is natural that you ask, what have the police done? What will this little Belgian do? I tell you at once, the police make the search. I make the order. I ask for the truth in little things, and from that grows the truth in great. We will, if you please, begin not with accusations, but with yesterday, from 4:30 to 5:30. Each of you will tell me where you were and what you saw or heard. No? That is all for the moment. We will not descend to the questions of the heart until we have the lines of time. They told it, one after another, and if I set it down here, it is as much for the curious way in which their narratives overlapped and yet left a thin seam one could not quite smooth with the hand. Lady. Evadne had been in the little blue drawing-room writing a note and ringing for more tea. She had seen Mr. Vane pass to the terrace, his coat unbuttoned, looking, she said, like a raven after something shiny. Mr. Vane smiled and replied that he had gone only to smoke, the cigar being a solace against the chill in the company. Jasper Grantham admitted to a quarter-hour in the billiard-room with Mr. Hartley, who confirmed it cheerfully, adding that Jasper's play had been off. Mrs. Penrith had retired to her room with a headache, induced by noise, she said, her glance flicking towards Mr. Hartley's innocent tweeds. Miss Gray had accompanied Eleanor upstairs and helped her draw off her wet shoes. Alice, the maid, had brought in the second pair, ivory satin and a shawl. And then, here the accounts diverged. Miss Gray said she had gone to fetch a sprig of orange blossom left downstairs by the florist, meaning to fix it to the bride's hair. Alice said the same, but with that odd rigidity common to the very honest or the very frightened. When asked whether anyone else had come to the room in those minutes, they both said no. At 5, Miss Grey returned. "No, it was Alice who returned first," said Miss Grey, and found the room empty. "I looked everywhere," the girl said in a small voice. "I did, sir. I thought perhaps she'd gone to the south stairs, the little ones, for a quiet minute." At 5:25, the footman on the south terrace had seen the white in the snow. "Bon," said Poirot, when they had done. He turned to Penrith. "And you, monsieur?" Penrith's jaw worked. "I was with Mr. Grantham in the study, discussing arrangements for the honeymoon. We were to go to Lausanne tonight." His eyes slid to Lady Evadne and back. "We were going to leave after dinner." Mr. Grantham confirmed it. Poirot inclined his head and attended to the fire tongs with maddening minuteness. "You see," he said at last, "we have the skeleton. Now we clothe it, very lightly, with a few human things." He spoke then to Miss Grey, but with a courtesy that made her raise her head. "Mademoiselle, you have affection for your friend. Was she gay, triste, reflective?" Miss Grey's eyes shone. "Quiet," she said, "almost too quiet. She told me she had never liked being the centre of a room. She said it was as though one were in a lantern with people peering in." "A lantern," repeated Poirot softly. "That is well said." He questioned Lady Evadne, who bridled at the necessity, and then, in the way of those who have rehearsed their own protests, let slip more than she meant. "If you ask me," she concluded, "this marriage was not what Eleanor would have chosen on a day of perfect clarity. But we rarely have those days when choices must be made. Mr. Penrith is eligible, of course, but he brings connections." "Connections are like ivy," Poirot observed. "They beautify, but they also cling." He let it pass and turned to Jasper. "Monsieur, your play at the billiards. Off, they say. One plays badly when one is vexed." Jasper smiled with a laziness too carefully arranged. "I'm usually vexed, Monsieur Poirot. It keeps me company." "Ah," said Poirot, "a faithful friend." It was not accusation, not yet, and yet the effect of his light touches was to make everyone a little more aware of themselves. I saw Mrs. Penrith's hand tighten upon her handkerchief, saw Mr. Hartley's easy humour stiffen, saw Mr. Vane's eyelids droop a shade lower, as if sleep would save him from the obligation to react. The maid watched Poirot as a dog watches a master's hand. When we had done with these preliminaries, Poirot desired to be shown the exact scene of the discovery, the room in which Eleanor had changed, the south stair, the terrace doors, and the path to the sundial. We went in a small procession, like persons on some melancholy tour. The bedroom was large and fair, the bed turned back to show a spread of lace like frost on water. There were 2 pairs of shoes set neatly upon a mat, a faint scent of something, orange blossom indeed, and another fragrance, light and crisp, hung about the dressing table. Poirot lifted a hairpin with the tips of his fingers and smiled at its severe right angle. "She had the mind for order," he remarked. "It is a pity to disorder such a mind." On the south stair, narrow and railed in white, the paint was chipped in one place, showing a darker layer beneath. Poirot crouched and touched it, then straightened, dusting a trace from his gloves with fastidious disdain. "Old things underneath the new," he said. "Mais oui." We came at last to the terrace. The gardeners had left most of the trampled paths as they were, at Poirot's request. The white lay dimpled by many feet. The sundial stood a little beyond, upon a low plinth, and there, upon a garden chair set askew as if someone had put it down in haste, lay the wedding dress. It had been lifted from the snow, shaken free of damp crystals, and set there like a ghost allowed a seat. The satin caught what wan light the afternoon allowed. The silk was bruised at the hem. Poirot approached with a gravity that checked even Mr. Hartley's restless shifting. "Permit that I touch," he said to Japp, who had joined us again with characteristic quiet feet. At the inspector's nod, Poirot lifted the gown a little, just enough for his hand to pass beneath the train. He did not turn up the hole. He eased 2 fingers along the seam and withdrew them delicately, as though retrieving a coin from a fountain. Between his finger and thumb lay a tiny dark fleck. He regarded it a second before transferring it to a square of paper he produced, as if by conjuring. "What is it?" I asked. "Something that does not belong to a bride," he said, "or to snow." He replaced the dress with a tenderness that made Miss Grey draw breath. Then he stood quite still and looked from the terrace doors to the sundial and back again, measuring with his eyes the distance, the sight lines from the house, the angle of the yew walk, the place where the footman would have stood to see. His moustaches quivered, not with excitement, but with satisfaction, the satisfaction, I knew, of a small piece that fitted into a space he had prepared for it. "Come," he said at last, turning to us with that little flare of authority that made the most obstinate person attend. "We have met the players and seen the stage. Now we must listen for the line that is out of place. After that, Hastings, the psychology will begin to speak." We went back towards the house as the light faded to a colder grey. Snow began again, fine as sifted flour. In the library, the company waited with that particular silence that gathers when people have grown tired of their own theories. Poirot stood on the hearth and warmed his hands, and then he addressed them, not with questions, but with an observation as gentle as a feather, and to my ears as devastating. "In every disappearance," he said, "there is a person who speaks too little and a person who speaks too much. I beg you to consider into which category you each fall. Meanwhile, I will ask only one thing. Which of you was last in possession of the orange blossom for the bride's hair? And why, at 5 minutes to 5, was it left upon a table in the music room, tied with a ribbon that had not been used?" Miss Grey's fingers opened on empty air. Lady Evadne's eyes sharpened. Japp, from his corner, looked up quickly. "And also," added Poirot, his tone very soft indeed, "who in this house smokes Balkan cigarettes? Because one small flake of ash has entangled itself where it could not have fallen by chance." He smiled, and in that smile I saw the first true movement of the case, the snow around us no longer merely cold and white, but imprinted faintly with the direction of a path. There was a brief, curious silence after Poirot's question, one of those pauses in which people look, not at the person speaking, but rather inwardly, to see how their own arrangements will be affected. Mrs. Penrith's handkerchief made a faint whisper. Lady Evadne's shoe tapped once on the carpet and was still. In the end it was Mr. Vane who answered first, with a lazy candour that felt as deliberate as anything else about him. "I do, on occasion," he said. "Balkan, that is. It was a habit acquired in chambers long ago. Bad coffee and worse tobacco. But yesterday I had only cigars. Lady Evadne can certify to my barbarity." "I can," she returned. "I caught the scent on the terrace. It is not to my taste, Mr. Vane." "Few things are, Lady Evadne," he murmured. Jasper Grantham lifted a shoulder. "I smoke anything I can afford," he said, "which, at present, is whatever my friends are kind enough to mislay." His smile flashed, and was gone. "Hartley keeps a tin of Balkan in his coat to impress practical men. Ask him." Hartley laughed. "I do keep a tin. In town. Not with me. I'm a pipe man, if truth be told. I had a briar yesterday afternoon. Ask the vicar's wife. She complained I was fumigating the small blue drawing-room." "C'est curieux," said Poirot, and his glance, bird-like, made a little tour of faces and settled nowhere. "We will not quarrel with tobacco yet. It is a vulgar quarrel. We will begin with the flower." He asked to see the music-room, and we went, the company contracting into clumps of alliance as we passed along a corridor hung with watercolours of moors and stags. The music-room, on the south front, was all satinwood and pale curtains, and a broadwood grand that seemed to wait in polished patience for a hand to wake it. On a side table lay the sprig of orange blossom, tied with a ribbon the exact blue of a winter sky at 4 o'clock. It was oddly forlorn, that little ornament, like a guest who had arrived too late and found the laughter gone. Poirot stood over it and did nothing for some seconds. Then he took out a small glass and peered, not at the flowers themselves, but at the ribbon and the knot. He did not touch. He breathed very lightly, as if a stronger exhalation might alter the thing under his eye. At last he nodded to himself, not in triumph, but in recognition, like a man meeting an acquaintance unexpectedly in a strange town. "May one know," Lady Yvain said with brittle brightness, "what the ribbon says to Monsieur Poirot?" "It says that the one who tied it is clever at doing things without being noticed," he returned. "This knot was made left-handed by someone who habitually works with the right." He smiled at her startled expression. "Forgive me, madam. It is a little trick of observation. Also, regardes, there is a small mark of powder here on the edge, very faint, the shade called, how is it? Peau de pêche. That suggests not the florist's boy, but a lady who does not go barefaced among company." "Half the women in this house wore powder," snapped Lady Yvain. "And as for hands, every girl at school could tie a ribbon either way and not look at it." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps. Yet the florist's boy, he would have used a florist's knot, quick, economical, with the tails cut to a length that pleases the eye of one who sells. This is domestic. It was done in a hurry." He let it be and wandered to the piano, where he looked at the keys with the same inattention one gives to a cat asleep on a cushion. "Who plays?" he asked. "Eleanor does." "Did," said Mr. Grantham, catching himself. "And Lydia." Miss Grey coloured. "Only a little for dancing." Poirot drew a finger very delicately along the ivory. "Someone touched this key," he indicated a middle E, "with a damp glove or a damp hand. It has taken a dullness the others have not. It is the one that begins the refrain of a very popular waltz. It is nothing, perhaps, but it is human." Miss Grey's voice was steadier than her cheeks. "I had been outside a moment before, to call for the florist. Perhaps it was I." "You did not go outside then," Lady Yvain said sharply. "At least not by this door. I was in the little blue drawing-room, as I told you, and I should have seen you cross the terrace." A faint ripple went through the group, like a draught that knows where it is going. Miss Grey's chin lifted a fraction. "I went by the passage to the west stairs," she said. "There is a side door. The florist had left his case on the stand there, and I fetched the sprig and came straight back." Her hands were very still upon each other. Alice went to fetch the shawl Eleanor had mislaid. The maid, thus brought in, threw a frightened glance at Poirot. "I did, sir. I couldn't find it. Not in the room, nor in the corridor." "Yet there was a shawl in the bride's room when we entered just now," Poirot observed. "A light one of lace." Alice swallowed. "That was the other, sir. The ivory. The woolen one. Miss Eleanor said she felt the draught on the south stair. Couldn't be found." Poirot filed that away without comment. He asked then, in a tone of absolute mildness that seemed to remove any sting, for each person's cigarette case, pipe, or cigar holder, to amuse a little curiosity. They produced them, some readily, some with the stiff reluctance of people who dislike being included among suspects if it requires them to empty their pockets. Mr. Vane's case was gold and entirely impeccable. Inside were 3 long Havanas, and tucked in a second tier, 2 slender cigarettes of a pale paper with a faint violet line. "Egyptians," he said, almost apologetically. "One for a long letter, one for surviving a poor dinner." Jasper had no case at all, but a crumpled packet produced with a flourish from the pocket of his waistcoat. There were 3 cigarettes, none matching, and a scatter of tobacco like chaff. "From the charity of mankind," he said, and gave Hartley a sideways grin. Hartley, true to his claim, had a pipe, a pouch, and nothing else. He opened the pouch for us to see. "Latakia," he proclaimed. "The real stuff. I expect your little Ash isn't as refined as that, eh, Poirot?" Mrs. Penrith's bag yielded a single ivory holder, scrupulously clean. Lady Yvonne did not smoke. Miss Grey did not either, unless very rarely, after dinner, and never yesterday, she added, with a brave look. "And you, Mr. Penrith?" Poirot asked. Penrith's mouth tightened. "I gave it up 3 months ago at Eleanor's request," he said. "I keep nothing about me." Japp, who had been observing with the intelligent stoicism of a man used to letting Poirot's eccentricities bear fruit, took the ash his colleague had preserved and compared it with the tobacco Hartley offered, and the ends in Jasper's packet. "Doesn't look like Latakia," he said, "nor like these odds and ends. I'd say Balkan, as you suggested." He turned to Jasper. "Where did you smoke yesterday after 5? "In the billiard room," Jasper returned, instantly and pleasantly. "As I told you, with Hartley. Until when?" "Until, what was it? 20 past. Half past, perhaps. We were interrupted by the general hullabaloo." 20 past, Hartley corroborated. "Give or take." Poirot's eyes rested one moment on Jasper's face. It was not a hostile look. It was, if anything, almost affectionate. "You are a good friend, Mr. Hartley," he said. "It is a quality most admirable." We returned to the library, and there Poirot made a small study of the chair that had received the wedding dress. He bent to the right arm of it, where the polished wood showed a new, faint scratch and a smear no broader than a thread. He did not call others to see. He simply looked, and then looked at the door, and then looked at Miss Grey's hands. It occurred to me, not for the first time, that I could follow him only as one follows a bird in a wood, by the gleam now and then of a wing one cannot seize. At length he asked that the servants be questioned about doors opened and closed. Japp undertook it with his usual thoroughness, taking the butler and the footman one by one. The answers were what one might expect at a country house in confusion. Too many comings and goings to fix a pattern with certainty. A tradesman arriving by the west door with a case. The side door to the service yard standing open for 10 minutes when ice was being fetched. The terrace doors shut at 5 and found unlatched at 5:25. "Voilà," Poirot said when Japp had finished. "It is a house that has breathed too much." As the afternoon waned and lamps were brought in, tempers frayed. Mrs. Penrith spoke to her son in a tone too low to hear, but edged with iron. Hartley, restless, began to proffer theories which collapsed under their own cheerfulness. Lady Yvonne suggested with cold civility that Eleanor had, at the last, discovered some infelicity in Mr. Penrith's past, and taken the wisest course. Mr. Grantham swore in a whisper, and gripped the mantel as if it were a rail on a pitching ship. Miss Grey sat very straight, looking at nothing. Jasper lounged with that boneless ease that makes a man seem to occupy more than his chair. Poirot, in the midst of this, contrived to re-establish an air of order. He set times again, quietly, like pegs in the ground. 4:50, the bride goes upstairs. 4:55, the maid and Miss Grey leave the room separately by different ways. 5, neither returns to find her. 5:25, the dress is seen on the snow. He added, almost to himself, between 5 and 5:20 is a small eternity. One can do much with 20 minutes if one has rehearsed. I asked, under my breath, whether he thought Eleanor had herself made the little theatre on the lawn. He shook his head very slightly. It is not her style, mon ami. The order in her room, the angle of the pin, the little bottle of scent with its stopper replaced. These say, I am precise, I leave the world as I find it. The dress on the snow says, look at me. It is the language of another. It was near 6 when Japp came in again, snow ticking on his coat. He shut the door behind him in a way that signalled news before he spoke. "I've been to the village," he said. Chauffeur at the Lion and Crown remembers Mr. Jasper Grantham passing the service gate on foot at about 5:10 yesterday, heading toward the lane beyond the south garden. Says he was smoking. Says he flicked the butt into the snow. Says he nodded to him and kept on. All eyes went to Jasper, who did not oblige us with a start or a flush or any other of the comfortable signs of guilt. He smiled as if at a joke told by a dull friend, and took a moment to choose his words. "I told you I went to the billiard room," he said, and I did. Before that, I had a turn in the air. I was restless. It was a wedding. I dislike weddings. His tone was agreeable. As for the lane, why not? The snow looked well there. "The time is awkward," Jap observed. "Your sister disappears between 5 and 5:20. You, who smoke Balkan, are seen near the south garden at 10 past. "Inspector," Jasper said sweetly, "you are determined to flatter me with importance. I am gratified." Poirot's moustaches made their smallest, most private movement. He crossed to the window and looked out at the blue dusk and the whitening terrace. "There is a proverb, Hastings," he remarked to me, though everyone heard, "that one snowflake resembles another. It is not so. We shall find the one that is different." He turned back, all serenity. "For the moment," he said, "we will accept Monsieur Jasper's promenade. We will also accept that the dress acquired an ash that was not its own. There is a story that wishes to be told very much, but it has begun too loudly. Such stories are usually lies or half-truths told with the zeal of a convert. Let it talk a little more. Meanwhile, I desire to speak for 5 minutes only with the maid, Mademoiselle Alice, and with the person who last wound the clock on the south landing." "The clock?" Mr. Grantham repeated, bewildered. "The small one with the chipped paint," Poirot said. "It keeps time badly when the air is damp. Someone corrected it yesterday. I wish to know who, and at what minute." He smiled then, and the room, which had been poised for accusation, faltered and resettled. The false shape the case had been so ready to assume held its breath, and the true one, I felt, drew a little nearer, not yet named, but present among us like the cold. Alice came into the small morning room, where Poirot had asked her to wait, her hands twisting the edge of her apron in a way that suggested she had done little else since the wedding day. She glanced at me, then at Poirot, and stood as if ready to bolt, should either of us raise a hand. The snowlight through the tall window fell across her face, showing the raw redness round her eyes, and the pallor of a girl not used to being the centre of anyone's attention. Poirot, who can be as gentle as a cat approaching a nervous bird, gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Please, mademoiselle, sit. We will talk a little. It is only to put in order some small confusions." "Yes, sir," she said, but her voice trembled. "You were with Mademoiselle Eleanor yesterday afternoon until—" "When?" "Around 5 o'clock, sir. I'd helped her change her shoes and fetched her lace shawl from the wardrobe. She said she might want the woolen one if she went down the south stair. I couldn't find it." "And you looked where?" "In her room first, then the passage, then the little sitting room next to hers. When I came back, she wasn't there." Poirot inclined his head, as if this were entirely expected. "And in that short absence, mademoiselle, you did not hear the sound of another person entering? No voice, no footstep?" She shook her head, then hesitated. "I thought I heard the floor creak, but it might have been the wind in the panelling. It was that cold. The wood sounded all over." "Très bien. And when you saw her last, how did she seem?" Alice swallowed. "Calm, like she'd been all morning. Not laughing, not nervous." "And her hair? Was it finished?" "Yes, sir. Miss Grey had done it." "Ah." Poirot let the syllable rest, then leaned forward, his voice very quiet. "Tell me now of the clock on the south landing. Who winds it?" "The butler, sir, every evening. 6 o'clock, regular as the dinner bell." "And yesterday?" I think he did it after the commotion started, sir. I remember hearing him come up with the key in his hand when I was looking for the shawl a second time. He wound it and set it back a few minutes. I heard it chime the quarter. Poirot's eyes brightened. Set it back? That is unusual. Alice nodded uncertainly. He said it was fast, sir. Merci, mademoiselle. That is all for the moment. When she had gone, I asked why the clock mattered. Because, Hastings, if the butler's time is slow, and the others spoke from that clock, then all their times are wrong by the same degree. It is the little shifts that make the truth invisible. We found the butler in his pantry, polishing a tray. He was a lean man with the patience of one who has seen generations of guests come and go. Yes, he wound the clock each evening. Yes, he had done so yesterday, though later than usual. It had gained 10 minutes, he explained. I put it right. Which meant that when it showed 5:15, it was in truth 5:25. Poirot observed softly. The butler's brow furrowed. If you say so, sir. Poirot's gaze flicked to me. Do you see, Hastings? When the footman says he saw the dress at 5:25 by the drawing-room clock, it may already have been there for 10 minutes without notice. We returned to the library, where Japp was taking statements from the footman in question. He confirmed the butler's correction, and admitted that he had not been looking toward the sundial until sent to fetch a rug for a guest. Could have been there before, sir, he conceded. Poirot thanked him, and with that same smoothness, turned to Lady Even, who was standing near the fire, speaking to Mrs. Penrith in tones just shy of openly critical. Madame, he said, you spoke of seeing Mr. Vane on the terrace yesterday before the disappearance. At what hour? She looked faintly surprised. 5 o'clock, perhaps a minute or two after. He was coming from the far end, coat open, looking rather pleased with himself. Pleased? Poirot's tone was interested, nothing more. As if he had found something he liked. I thought he'd discovered a good cigar. Vane smiled faintly. I was enjoying the cold air, he said. It helps me think. And what were you thinking of, monsieur? Poirot asked, the question framed as lightly as if they discussed the weather. My brief in the Lavenham estate case, Vane replied, with no pause. I carry my work with me, I'm afraid. Poirot let that be, but I could see from the way his head inclined that some thread had been caught. The snow had thickened outside, and the afternoon seemed to contract into an early twilight. Poirot used it as his moment to walk, with no more than a murmured suggestion, to the south landing and stand before the clock. He set his watch against it, considered, and then stepped to the narrow stair. From there he measured, pacing with deliberate steps, the time it would take to descend, reach the terrace doors, cross to the sundial, and return by the same way. 2 minutes down, he said. 1 minute to place the gown. 2 minutes back. In 5 minutes, one could make the little theatre. Japp frowned. But why? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Because, mon ami, it was necessary to make the world believe that Mademoiselle Eleanor walked out into the snow of her own will and left her finery behind. That idea, it was the first seed planted. Once the seed is in the ground, the gardener must only water it. He turned, looking toward the yew walk, now ghostly in the failing light. There is a second seed, he murmured. We have not yet seen it. It was at this point that a maid came hurrying up with a message for Mr. Grantham. A constable from the village had arrived with something found near the lane. It proved to be a woman's small leather reticule, damp from melted snow, its clasp undone. Inside was a handkerchief with Eleanor's initials, and a small mirror cracked across the corner. Mr. Grantham seized it with a sound between grief and triumph. She must have dropped it when she... He stopped, unwilling to complete the thought. Poirot, however, did not share the certainty. He examined the bag minutely, paying attention to the wetness along one side and the grains of salt that clung to the stitching. Road salt, he said. This bag has been on the lane after the snow was treated this morning. Therefore it was not here last night when she vanished. It was placed after, perhaps even today. Japp's brows went up. Planted. Planted, Poirot agreed. A gardener indeed. The implication sank into the room like a cold draught. I could see the shifting of eyes, the half-swallowed retorts. Someone here was attempting to write a false story, and had not yet realized that Poirot read such fictions better than their authors. He turned then, addressing them all with that courteous firmness that brooked no interruption. "You will forgive me if I do not ask more questions tonight. I will think. Tomorrow morning I shall speak again to each of you. But I say this now. Eleanor Grantham may be gone from this house, but she did not vanish into the snow, as a bird vanishes into the air. Someone opened a door for her, or closed it upon her." The company broke up under the weight of those words, some to their rooms, some to confer in pairs by the fire. Poirot watched them go, his face unreadable. Only when the last had left did he speak to me. "Hastings, it is always the same. The truth is, like the warmth in this house, it leaks away by the smallest of cracks, and everyone says, 'It is nothing.' But by morning, the frost is on the pillows." He looked once more toward the south stair, where the little clock ticked with prim self-importance, and I knew that in his mind the 20 minutes between 5 and 5:20 had begun to contract, closing in around the one person who had truly used them. The next morning broke with a light that was almost cruel in its clarity. Every branch and parapet etched in frost, every footprint on the terrace frozen into permanence. The snow had ceased in the night, leaving a stillness that made even the smallest sound, a door closing, a voice in the hall, seem unnaturally loud. At breakfast, the guests gathered in a strained approximation of civility. Conversation faltered whenever footsteps were heard approaching, as though each expected news to arrive in the next moment. Poirot took his chocolate in silence, his gaze fixed not on the people at the table, but on the long windows, where the gardens lay pale and waiting. At 9 precisely, he asked that the library be made ready for him. One by one, he intended to see them again. "The morning light," he remarked to me, "is merciless. It shows what the evening's shadows conceal." The first to enter was Miss Grey. She came with a composure that struck me as almost rehearsed, her gloves in one hand, the other resting lightly on the back of the chair before she sat. Poirot greeted her with warmth, but wasted no time. "Mademoiselle," he said, "yesterday you were good enough to describe your last moments with Mademoiselle Eleanor. There is, however, one thing I did not ask. When you returned with the orange blossom, did you notice whether the south stair door to the terrace was closed?" She hesitated a fraction too long. Yes, I believe it was." "You believe, or you are certain?" Her eyes flickered. "Certain." Poirot inclined his head. "That is interesting, because the maid tells me she returned a moment before you and found it ajar, the snow just inside melting upon the mat. You see how our pictures differ." Miss Grey's fingers tightened on her gloves. "Perhaps she is mistaken. Perhaps." Poirot's tone was mild. "But if she is not, it would suggest someone had already left that way before either of you returned. And that, mademoiselle, would alter the order of events considerably." Miss Grey said nothing, but a flush crept along her cheekbones. Poirot dismissed her gently, and when the door closed, he murmured to me, "There is a story she will not tell, but she is not the only one." Next came Jasper Grantham, all lazy charm and half smiles, as though the entire affair were a diversion put on for his benefit. Poirot regarded him with equal calm. "Monsieur, I am told you were seen on the lane at 5:10. Jasper's smile deepened. "We've covered that ground, haven't we? I like to walk, even in patent shoes, which are ill-suited to snow. You left no trace of such a walk in the lane, monsieur, but you did leave a mark near the side gate, a half-print, blurred as though by someone hastening to conceal it. "That could be anyone's," Jasper said smoothly. "No," Poirot replied. "It is a size and shape particular to you, and it is placed such that the wearer was returning toward the house, not leaving it. Which raises a question. Where were you truly between 5 o'clock and the time you joined Mr. Hartley in the billiard room?" Jasper's gaze sharpened for a second, before softening again. "You'd like it to be dramatic, wouldn't you? But I'm afraid I was doing nothing more thrilling than cooling my temper. Families bring out the worst in one." When he had gone, Poirot made a small note on a slip of paper and tucked it into his pocket. "He plays for time," he said, "but in his delay there is purpose." Mrs. Penrith followed, tall and immaculate, her expression one of polite endurance. She answered Poirot's questions with clipped precision, denying any knowledge of movements on the south stair or the terrace. But when he asked if she had known of Eleanor's woolen shawl, she paused. "I believe I saw it yesterday morning," she said, "in the small salon upstairs." "Ah, and that is near the south stair, is it not?" "Yes. Why?" "Because," Poirot said, "it was there again last night, though neither the maid nor Miss Grey claims to have found it. It had been folded, imperfectly, and with traces of damp on one edge." Her brows rose slightly, but she did not answer. He let her go with nothing more. By the time Mr. Vane entered, the pale sunlight had shifted, casting a bright line across the carpet between them. The solicitor was unhurried, his manner one of a man accustomed to having the terms of any conversation set by himself. "Monsieur Vane," Poirot began, "you were seen on the terrace just after 5. Did you notice whether the sundial could be observed clearly from where you stood?" Vane considered. "Yes, I think so. It stands proud of the yews." "And the dress? Was it there then?" A pause, then a slight shake of the head. "No. Yet by 5:25, according to the footman, it was. Which means, monsieur, that in those minutes something changed, not only in the garden, but perhaps in the mind of the person who placed it there." Vane's expression did not shift, but something in the line of his shoulders betrayed the strain of holding his composure. "You have a theory, I presume?" Poirot smiled. "I have many, but they are like seedlings. One must wait to see which thrives. When the last of them had been seen, we walked together to the south landing. The clock ticked on, smug in its restored time. Poirot stood beside it, looking down the narrow stair to the terrace door. "Hastings," he said softly, "there is a question that has been with me since the beginning. Why the snow? Why not the bed, the chair, the floor? Why must the dress be outside? The answer is in the psychology. Snow erases. It swallows footprints, blurs edges, hides the means by which something arrived. Our culprit counts on that." We went down, stepping out onto the terrace, the cold cutting into us like a blade. The sundial stood serene, its bronze gnomon casting a thin shadow on the white. Poirot walked a slow circle around it, then crouched, examining the grass at the base where the snow was thinner. He touched a small, flattened patch with his gloved hand. "Here, Hastings, see? The snow has been pressed not by feet, but by something laid down. And there, faint traces of fibre. The dress was carried, not dragged, and placed from the far side, so the terrace doors would see it full in the centre of their frame. It was then Japp came striding across the terrace from the yew walk, his coat flapping in the wind. 'Poirot,' he said, 'we've got something else. The village postmistress swears a telegram went out yesterday afternoon from here, addressed to a Mr. Ainsworth in London. No signature, but she remembers the handwriting. Small, tidy, with a flourish on the capital letters.' Poirot's eyes lit. 'And when did this telegram go?' 'Just after 4. That is most instructive,' Poirot murmured. 'A message sent before the disappearance, yet certain to be received after. That is the act of someone arranging a scene in advance.' He stood very still for a moment, gazing back at the great house, the line of windows, the south stair hidden just beyond. "We are almost there, Hastings. But before the day is out, I must speak with only one person, and I think they will tell me, whether they wish it or not, how the snow came to hold the shape of a bride's absence." It was one of Poirot's small, disconcerting habits to declare that he required only one person, and then to spend an hour or two looking everywhere except at that person. After Japp's news about the telegram, he did not ring for Lydia Gray or summon Jasper with a flourish. He asked instead for Eleanor's dressing room to be opened, and for her desk to be brought exactly as it had stood the day before. The housemaid carried in a narrow satinwood escritoire with a little superstructure of pigeonholes, its key tied on a string. The lids of the ink bottles clicked when the drawer was set down. There was something horribly intimate in that sound, like a voice resuming a sentence left unfinished. "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said to the maid, and when she had gone he stood for a moment, merely looking. His head tipped, first left, then right, in those small increments that mean he is measuring in the air. He drew out the chair, sat, and opened the blotter. It was the most ordinary kind. Blue cardboard, a sheet of blotting paper half used, with the little grey islands of words reversed, sunk into it like footprints set when the ground was soft and made visible when the frost recedes. Poirot lifted it to the light of the south window, and then, with a small shake of the head, slipped a hand to his pocket and produced a shaving mirror. He laid the blotter over the glass, and the ghostly writing righted itself. I had seen him perform the trick before. It never failed to give me a sensation, as if one had caught a whisper and forced it to speak aloud. "Euston, tonight, Ainsworth, sleeping berth, initial only," he read very softly. Beneath, a line, "Not Lausanne." Then a word, begun and scratched out, and beneath it, "Thank you, L." He laid the blotter down and did not look at me. "You observe, Hastings, that sometimes a bride writes not in the plural, but in the singular. You think she intended to leave?" "I think she intended to go somewhere that is not the honeymoon her father discussed with Mr. Penrith," he said. "And she had help, of a sort." "L," I said slowly. He made a small movement of the hand, neither agreement nor denial. "We do not yet know if the L thanks because she assisted, or because she refused. But we know this. There was to be a sleeping berth from Euston last night, and Ainsworth," he lingered on the name, tasting it, "is not, perhaps, a mysterious gentleman to be found in a fog, but a very prosaic person at a travel agency who sells tickets to people who do not wish others to know their destination." He closed the desk and asked that the house telephone be placed at his disposition. Through the butler, he sent 2 messages. One to Japp's sergeant in the village, to wire London for the identity of Mr. Ainsworth, used by Highcombe Hall, and another to the station master at Upper Highcombe to inquire what trains had been taken to town between 4 and 6. "We will see," he murmured, "if a fox passed through the hen-yard wearing a lace cap." While these hooks were baited and flung, there was the matter of the shawl. It lay, neatly folded now, in the small salon upstairs, ivory wool with a border of pale blue. Poirot took it up, weighed it in his hands, and ran a forefinger along the damp mark Alice had noticed. He lifted the finger to his nose with a fastidious sniff. "Not only water," he said, "a trace of scent, violette, and something colder. The air that is breathed through a scarf when one is outside." His eyes went, without moving, to the south stair and the door at the bottom. "You see, Hastings?" The lady who carried the dress to the sundial wrapped herself quickly. When she returned, she folded the shawl in haste, with hands that were cold and a mind that was hot. "But which lady?" I asked. He did not reply, and a moment later Japp filled the silence, arriving with the particular briskness he assumes when he suspects the news in his pocket will please and annoy Poirot at the same time. "Luck's with us," he announced. "Two things. First, the station master. A single first to London was taken at 4:37 by a lady with a small case, his words, wearing a veil and travelling alone. He says she kept her face turned away when he spoke. Second, I've a line on Ainsworth. There's a Mr. Percy Ainsworth who keeps a discreet little place off the Strand. Tickets, passages, theatre bookings, the lot, for people who don't want their business in the morning papers. He's used by some of the smart set for convenience. Our telegraph to London will fetch an answer from him about any reservation last night." Poirot made him a little bow. "Très bien, mon ami. And the third thing, there is always a third when you look as you look." Japp grinned, half sheepish. "Found something in Mr. Jasper's room. A bit of veil, scorched in the fireplace, and a smear on the mantel that looks like powder. Doesn't put him in the soup, but it earns him a spoon." It was not, I must admit, an agreeable piece of news. The picture arranged itself all too readily in the mind. The dress on the snow, a man with Balkan tobacco and a careless smile, a scrap of veil thrust into a grate as one thrusts an incriminating letter, the ash entangled as if by accident. And yet I had seen yesterday the way Poirot's moustaches grew still when the obvious presented itself. He did not show surprise now. He merely allowed the smallest purse of his lips. "You will keep Mr. Jasper for the moment on the string," he said. "Do not pull. Do not let him go. Meanwhile, indulge me in a little theatre, Japp. At 4 o'clock I desire that all the household be assembled in the music-room. At 5, when the small clock on the south landing will chime the quarter, I shall ring. We will make the journey to the terrace together. It is useful, sometimes, to perform the play with an audience." Japp's eyes twinkled. "Your show, your cues." The hours until 4 moved with that strange sensation one has in a besieged house. Normal activities go on, and yet everyone behaves as if at any moment a gun will fire. I saw Hartley attempt, twice, to draw Penrith into conversation about dogs, and fail. I saw Mrs. Penrith write 3 letters and tear up each neatly. I saw Lady Yvonne move from looking down at the yew walk to standing with her back to it, as if it said disagreeable things. Lydia Gray ate nothing at luncheon, and answered me with politeness that had the clarity of a glass bell. Mr. Vane appeared unaltered, as if all of life were a matter of reading the clauses twice and signing only where the paper was thick. Jasper, when I passed him in the corridor, smiled and asked me if I would back him at écarté for 6pence a point, and when I answered that I had no mind to gamble, he said, "No, then we are alike at last." Before 4, a wire came from London. Japp brought it in his hand, and even before he spoke I saw Poirot had the answer from his face. "Ainsworth confirms," Japp said. "Reservation made yesterday at 3:50 for a single berth on the night sleeper to Inverness. Cash paid on account by messenger at 4:20. Name given, E. Lane. No address." He adds a note. "The messenger was a young lady, very neat, with small handwriting in the book, a flourish on the capitals." "And the messenger's hair?" Poirot asked, as if inquiring whether the weather was fine. "Blonde," said Japp. "Curls very tidy under her hat." We did not speak the name that hovered between us. Poirot merely folded the paper and set it, face down, on the mantel. "We will not ask Miss Gray to explain her kindness," he said. "We will allow her to explain something else." At a little before 4, we gathered as commanded in the music-room. The light was already lowering, the sky a thin enamel of icy blue over the lawns. Poirot, with that air of mild ceremony that so infuriates the impatient, took his position by the Broadwood. "We do nothing clever," he announced. "We will replace what was done with what is true. Mademoiselle Gray, you will stand as you stood yesterday when you tied the ribbon around the orange blossom. Monsieur Vane, you will take your cigar and go, as you did, to the terrace for your thoughts. Madame, to Mrs. Penrith. "You may seat yourself where you chose to have the headache, monsieur." "Jasper, pardon, if you would be so amiable as to stroll to the side gate and back, precisely as yesterday. No more, no less. Mr. Hartley, you will stand in the doorway and talk about nothing. Mr. Penrith, you will talk to your future father-in-law about Lausanne. Lady Yvanne, you will write your note in the little blue room. And Alice, ma fille, you will go to seek the shawl. We will not hurry. We will breathe. We will let the minutes do their work." It was an odd pantomime, and yet I felt at once the peculiar power of it. People, when they reenact what they have sworn to, cannot help correcting their own lies. They move as their bodies remember, not as their minds approve. Lydia stood at the side table and took up the ribbon. Her fingers, decidedly right-handed, made the first movement, faltered, and then, aware of Poirot's eyes, she shifted and tied with an awkward left twist. Poirot said nothing. Vane lit a cigar and went out. Lady Yvanne sat with her back straight and wrote, and when she blotted the paper, she turned it, as a woman does who has long practice and no patience with ink. Mrs. Penrith reclined with great exactitude, and rang for water she did not need. Jasper, cheerful, took his hat and went, whistling a small tune. Hartley made the conversation of a man who knows he must act unconcerned to keep himself from fear. Penrith stood too rigidly and stared too often at the door, and Mr. Grantham said "Lausanne" 3 times, as if the name would create the thing. Poirot, at the piano, laid a finger on middle E and depressed it very gently, enough to sound the faintest note. It had that dullness again. "Damp," he murmured, and his eyes went, not to Lydia, but to the hallway where the south stair began. We waited for the clock. Its little quarter chimed with prim virtue. At the sound, Poirot raised his hand. "Now," he said softly, "we will go to see what we saw yesterday." We went in procession, a curious, unwilling line, through the door, along the corridor, up the few steps to the south landing, down the narrow stair with its white rail. The terrace door stood shut. Poirot paused and looked at the mat. "Dry," he said. He opened the door himself and stood aside to let the cold wash over us. The sundial, solitary, lifted its bronze to the thin light. "And now," said Poirot, and his voice altered, becoming suddenly very gentle indeed, "we will add one thing we did not have yesterday, the truth. Mademoiselle Gray, Lydia, when you left the bride to fetch the orange blossom, you did not go to the west door at once. You went down these stairs to the terrace, to a person who waited for you by the yews. You gave her the woolen shawl. You told her the side door would be unlatched, and you promised to see that at the moment when the house looked away, the dress would lie where everyone could see it, and no one would think to look for her where she truly went. Shall I say more? Or will you?" Lydia did not. Faint, she did not protest. She stood very still, and the colour left her face in a wash that was more surrender than shock. "I promised to say nothing," she said at last, in a voice that was almost level, "but I did not promise to lie when asked. You have not asked me. You have told me." "Alors," said Poirot, and bowed his head as if to thank her for the exactness of her mind. "One question only then, and it is not about the heart. The telegram. Why to Ainsworth for Inverness?" "Because that is where she would be safe," Lydia said. Her eyes, which had been dull, lifted and met Richard Penrith's with a steadiness that contained nothing of triumph and nothing of plea. "From all of us." Penrith took a step forward, but Japp's hand, unobtrusively placed, stopped him. "Safe from what?" Japp asked. "From the money," said Lydia simply. "From trustees and settlements and bargains. From being talked over as if she were not in the room. From marriage made into a plan on paper by men who never looked at her when she was not dressed like a bride." There was a small silence in which the cold could be heard. Somewhere a rook called once, and was quiet. Poirot turned his face to the yews. "And yet," he said, almost to himself, "someone here was not content to let her go. Someone who planted the dress, the ash, the bag. Someone who would have had us look south while she went north." He looked back at us then, and there was nothing gentle in his eyes. "We are very near, mesdames et messieurs. The little grey cells have heard enough. Before the day ends, the gardener who has been arranging his borders will find that the frost has bitten his own fingers, and we shall ask very quietly why he feared a young woman's freedom so very much." The little procession broke apart as we stepped back into the warmth of the house, but the warmth was only of the air. No one spoke above a murmur, and each person seemed to carry a private draught about them. Lydia remained by the terrace door for a moment longer than the rest, as if she needed the cold to steady her. Poirot, however, did not linger. He passed directly into the corridor, his step light, almost delicate, and then paused at the foot of the south stair to look once more at the chipped paint on the banister. His gloved fingertip traced the floor, and then he turned abruptly toward the library. "Come, Hastings," he said. "We will see if the gardener is ready to admit what he has planted." Japp followed us in, shutting the door behind him. "You've got someone in mind?" he said, not as a question, but as an accusation. Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui. There are too many little arrangements here that speak of the same mind. Placing the dress, dropping the ash, planting the bag in the lane. All are meant to shout, 'She fled,' and whisper, 'Someone helped her too much.' The object is not to find her, but to make certain we do not look in the right direction at all." "And the right direction is?" Japp prompted. Poirot settled into a chair, arranging his cuffs with care. "Not south to London or west to Lausanne, north to Inverness, but not on the train reserved. That berth, my friend, was the decoy. Mademoiselle Eleanor is already beyond the reach of the timetable, and the only person who could ensure that was the one who had both her confidence and the freedom to move about the house, unnoticed after the room was left empty." I thought of Alice, but Poirot shook his head almost before the notion had formed. "Non, Hastings. The maid has neither the cunning for such a deception, nor the nerve to stand in the garden under many windows carrying a bundle of white silk. No, the gardener I speak of is a creature of habit, who knows the rhythms of this house as well as its creaks and draughts, and who is accustomed to smoothing over disturbances before others notice them." His gaze drifted toward the door, and before I could speak, it opened. Mr. Vane, the solicitor, entered with the unhurried step of a man whose life runs by appointment. He inclined his head to us and closed the door behind him. "I hear you wish to speak to me privately, Monsieur Poirot." "Just so," Poirot said, rising slightly in his chair. "You are in a unique position, monsieur. You are trusted by Mr. Grantham, consulted by Mrs. Penrith, and known to both the bride and the groom. It is you who drew up the settlement, n'est-ce pas?" Vane's lips thinned. "That is so, and if you are suggesting I have acted improperly—" "I suggest nothing yet. I merely observed that you were on the terrace at precisely the time when the south door was open, the snow not yet marked by the dress. You were seen walking from the far end, coat open, looking, as Lady Yvonne put it, pleased with yourself. And you, monsieur, are one of the very few in this house who could leave by a servant's passage, reach the lane, and return without being remarked upon." Vane's eyes met Poirot's steadily. "If I had wanted Eleanor gone, I could have put her in a motor car and had her in London by evening. I had no need for theatrics." "Precisely," Poirot said softly. "That is why you created them. The theatrics were not to explain her absence. They were to hide that she had no need of you to go. She arranged her own escape. But that was not to your advantage, was it? A bride who leaves without a scandal can return without one. And a bride who returns may yet marry on her own terms, which might not include the settlement you designed." Vane's jaw tightened, and for a moment the mask of dry civility slipped, showing the calculation beneath. You make a great deal from a patch of snow and a cigarette ash. I make a great deal from the psychology, Poirot corrected. The ash could have been dropped anywhere, but it was placed in the train of the gown, as if by accident, to suggest that the person who carried it smoked. But you do not smoke Balkan, monsieur. You smoke cigars. Jasper smokes Balkan. That was the first seed. The bag in the lane was the second, salt on the leather, proving it had lain there only after the roads were treated this morning. And the third seed was the clock, set back to make the interval for placing the dress appear shorter, and to give you an alibi in conversation with Lady Evardin when you returned from the far end of the terrace. Vane said nothing, but his stillness had become too perfect. Japp shifted his weight, watching him as a fisherman watches the line. "Where is she?" Japp asked. "Not your concern, Inspector," Vane said evenly. "She is safe." "That will be for her to tell us," Japp returned. Poirot rose, smoothing his waistcoat. "You will tell us, monsieur, because the game is over. You planted the evidence not to harm her, but to delay the pursuit, so that she would be well away before her trail was truly sought. And yet you feared she might trust someone else in this house enough to send word. That is why you tried to fix suspicion on Jasper, volatile, careless, and so easily made to look guilty. But you overlooked one thing. In your haste to shift the clock, you made every honest witness a liar by the same measure. That is a flaw no gardener should permit in his design." Vane's lips curved in something too dry to be called a smile. "If you know where she is, why trouble me?" "Because," Poirot said, "it is not enough to find the gardener. One must also pull up the weeds he has sown. You will tell us where she went after she left the south stair, and with whom she met by the yews." For a long moment Vane was silent. Then he drew a breath, as if acknowledging that the frost had indeed bitten his fingers. "There was a car," he said, "driven by a friend of hers from before, someone the family would never have permitted to take her. She went north, not by train, but by road, keeping to the back ways. I was to place the dress and the bag to point everyone south. It gave them 12 hours before the first real search began." "And the friend's name?" Japp pressed. Vane shook his head. "You'll have it from her, if she chooses to give it. My part is done." Poirot's eyes softened, though his mouth remained set. "You see, Hastings, sometimes the gardener plants for beauty as he understands it, and not for harvest. But even then, he changes the ground." Vane turned toward the door, and Japp stepped into his path. "You'll stay close until we've spoken to her," he said. When he had gone, Poirot stood looking at the window, where the frost patterns were beginning to blur in the weak noon sun. "It is almost complete," he murmured. "We have the hand that placed the seeds. What remains is to see the plant itself, and to ask if it grew in the soil of love or of escape. For that, Hastings, we must follow the road north." I felt the first stirrings of the chase, the sense that all the slow circling of the past day was narrowing to a single track. And yet, in Poirot's expression, there was none of the hunter's satisfaction, only the still watchfulness of a man who knows that what waits at the end of a path may not be prey, but truth, and that truth is not always gentle. By the time Japp had arranged for a constable to keep a discreet eye on Vane, the daylight was beginning to thin again, a slow fading that made the snowy lawns beyond the windows seem almost luminous. Poirot, however, was not watching the view. He had gone still in that particular way of his, when the puzzle's outline has begun to harden in his mind, and each movement he made from that point on was deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Hastings," he said at last, "we must now go to the road north. Not in our bodies yet, but in our little grey cells. Before we follow her physically, we must walk in her mind. What does she take? Not luggage, save the small case at the station. A decoy. Not her wedding finery. It is left here. She takes the shawl, perhaps another dress already in the motor, perhaps a purse. She goes quickly and without farewell to anyone but one person. That is the step we must see clearly, who meets her under the yews, and why she trusts that person. I began to say that Lydia was the obvious answer, but Poirot cut me off with a small shake of the head. Non, mon ami. Lydia gave her the shawl and the means to leave unobserved, but the car was arranged separately. Lydia is the accomplice within, the other is without. Such partnerships are rare unless founded on long acquaintance. I ask myself, who in this region has such a tie to Eleanor Grantham that she would risk everything to put herself in their keeping? It was Japp who answered, flipping open his notebook. I've been speaking with the village constable. Says there's a Mrs. Sarah Linden, widowed, lives 3 miles off on the old coaching road. Known Eleanor since she was a girl. Bit of a black sheep in her day, according to gossip. Travels a lot, keeps her own motor. Wasn't seen in the village yesterday. Poirot's eyes half closed. Une amie d'enfance, perhaps. A figure of independence, offering escape not just from a wedding, but from the machinery that drives it. Japp looked up. If she's gone with Mrs. Linden, we can have men there inside an hour. Patience, mon cher, Poirot murmured. If we go with the blunt foot, we may drive our bird from the bush. Better we go with the step that makes no sound. First, we will confirm without doubt that the car came this way yesterday. The snow, it is the friend of truth as well as of lies. We took the south drive out to the lane, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Where the road bent toward the yew walk's far end, Poirot stopped, scanning the verge. Here the snow was marked with a set of faint, narrow tracks, the kind left by tires with a particular tread, chevrons at a slant. He crouched, pointing. Note, Hastings, the impression is softened, not crisp. This is not from today, but from yesterday when the snow was still falling lightly. The tracks turn, see? Not toward the village, but to the by-road that leads northwest. Japp, bending over the marks, gave a low whistle. And they line up with what the constable told me. Mrs. Linden runs a Clermont Bayard with tires just like these. Poirot's satisfaction was quiet, almost inward. So, she comes here, she stops beyond the yews, she receives her passenger, she is gone before the clock is wound back. Our gardener then goes to his planting. We returned by the side door, where the snow on the mat was now long melted, and found the household in that peculiar state of watching without seeming to watch. Penrith stood at the far end of the hall, speaking low to his mother. Lady Evadne was at the writing table, her pen unmoving above a sheet of paper. Lydia was nowhere to be seen. Poirot asked to see Mr. Grantham privately. The older man came into the library with a heavy, suspicious step, the air of one braced for bad news. "Have you found her?" he demanded. "In a manner of speaking," Poirot said. "She is safe. She is with a friend, where she chose to go." Grantham's face darkened. "With a friend? And you mean to tell me you'll just let her—" "I mean to tell you," Poirot interrupted gently, "that Mademoiselle Eleanor was not abducted, nor was she persuaded by any enemy. She left because the choice presented to her yesterday was not the one she wished to make. She feared to speak plainly to her father, so she acted in silence." Grantham's fists clenched. "If she thinks she can run away and return as if nothing has happened—" Poirot's voice sharpened. "Non, monsieur. If she returns, it will be because she is welcome back without coercion or bargain. Otherwise, she will remain where she is." Grantham's colour rose, but he said nothing more, and after a moment he left us, shutting the door hard enough to make the glass in the cabinets tremble. Japp gave a low grunt. "That'll sit in his craw. But what now?" "Now," Poirot said, "we pay a call to Mrs. Linden, but not in the style of the police. Hastings, you and I will go alone, in a hired car from the village, and with no word to anyone here. Japp, you will keep the gardener," he smiled faintly, "from pruning his borders further while we are away." The drive to Mrs. Linden's was along narrow lanes, edged with high hedgerows, the snow still clinging in the hollows. The house, when we reached it, was a low, rambling affair of grey stone, with ivy clinging to the gables. A motor car stood in the yard, its tyres wearing the same chevron pattern we had seen by the yews. Mrs. Linden herself came to the door, a woman in her early 50s with a frank gaze and the posture of someone accustomed to making her own way. She took us in without surprise. "I thought you'd come," she said. "She's here." Poirot inclined his head. "May we speak with her? She'll speak for herself if she wants to." Mrs. Linden stepped aside, and we entered a sitting room where the fire burned low but bright. Eleanor Grantham was there, seated by the hearth, the woolen shawl around her shoulders. She looked up at us, with neither alarm nor shame, only a quiet certainty, as though she had finally found a place where the air suited her. Poirot approached her slowly, as if not to disturb that stillness. "Mademoiselle, you know why I am here?" She nodded. "To tell them I'm safe. And perhaps," Poirot said gently, "to tell them why you chose the snow rather than the isle." She met his gaze without flinching. "Because it was all arranged without me. My dress, my future, my husband, my money. They talked over me as though I were furniture. I thought, if I walk down that aisle, I'll be fixed in place forever, so I walked away instead." "And the theatre of the dress?" Poirot asked. Her mouth curved faintly. "Not mine. I wanted to go quietly. Someone else wanted it to look like a story in the papers." "We," Poirot said, "we have spoken to him." She drew the shawl closer. "Then there's nothing more to say. I'll write to my father when I'm ready, but I'm not going back to be bargained over." Poirot inclined his head, the gesture one gives to an equal. "That is your right, mademoiselle, and I will tell them only what you wish. But know this, when a garden is cleared of weeds, sometimes flowers appear that no one expected. Perhaps one day you will wish to plant again." She smiled then, the first true smile I had seen on her face, and it was enough. Poirot rose, thanked Mrs. Linden, and we took our leave. As we drove back through the whitening dusk, I asked him if he would tell Penrith where she was. He shook his head. "No. The gardener planted to mislead us, but he also bought her time. Time, mon ami, is the only soil in which certain truths will grow. We must leave her there until she chooses to be found." And as Highcombe Hall came into view again, its windows glowing in the falling dark, I understood that Poirot had no intention of ending the affair tonight. The last act, he knew, would be played when Eleanor Grantham herself decided the scene was ready. Dinner was a strained, perfunctory affair, the sort one endures because habit demands it. Conversation clung to the edges of the table, avoiding the centre as if there were a draught no one wished to acknowledge. Mr. Grantham spoke little and drank more. Mrs. Penrith watched her son with the fixed grace of a statue. Lady Evadne's fork made an occasional precise tap against her plate that set my nerves on edge. Jasper amused himself by inquiring after the weather in Lausanne. Hartley, affronted at last by his own inability to cheer, fell silent. Lydia did not appear. Poirot ate modestly, and to my eye watched the doors rather than the faces. After the servants had withdrawn, Japp came to the doorway and lifted an eyebrow at Poirot. The two exchanged one of those brief, wordless looks that pass like a note under the table. Poirot rose, wiped his lips with the same care he applied to any ritual, and addressed the company. "Mesdames et messieurs, forgive that I interrupt your dessert. I ask that we go now to the small blue room. Something has occurred there that concerns us all." There was a movement, like a collective intake of breath, and then chairs scraped, and we went. In the little drawing-room, lamplight fell upon a small escritoire with its lid raised. The lock was splintered. On the carpet lay the heap of a jewellery case's trays, velvet up, the slots empty. The scent of violets hung faint and discordant above the cold gleam of the broken lock. Lady Yverdon stopped short and pressed her hand to her throat. "My mother's parure," she said, in a voice as tight as wire. "Gone." Japp's tone was neutral. "The maid bringing coffee found it like this 5 minutes ago. No sign of the thief." Grantham swore and turned on the butler, who stood pale and rigid in the doorway. Poirot lifted a hand, and the tirade died, as a good conductor stills a section with a half gesture. "Calmly," he said. "We do not help the truth by frightening it. The jewels, Lady Yverdon, when were they last seen?" "This afternoon," she said crisply. "I took the pearls from the second tray for a stringing that is overdue. The parure I had examined yesterday morning. It was intact." "Ah," Poirot breathed. "Yesterday morning, before the ceremony. And since then, who has had access to this room?" "Everyone," she returned bitterly. "It opens from the main corridor, but the case was always locked." Poirot's gaze went to the splintered metal. "Not locked when courage fails or urgency burns." He turned quietly to Japp. "You will find, I think, that this damage is not of 5 minutes standing. It is old wood that has been forced and then closed to look whole. The crack, voyez, shows dust in the deeper fibres. The theft was accomplished before dinner. Before tea, perhaps? No, before the wedding." Japp bent, examined, and grunted assent. "Gentleman burglar who knows his way about a house in a fuss," he observed, "or a guest who knows where the fuss will be." All eyes slid, as of their own accord, towards Jasper. He smiled lazily. "You forget, Inspector, that I am supposed to have been industriously planting cigarette ash in the shrubbery." "Pardon," Poirot said, almost kindly. "You are not supposed, monsieur. You are arranged. There is a difference." Jasper's smile stayed, but an edge appeared in it. Poirot moved no nearer the desk. Instead, he crossed to the fireplace, laid a finger against the marble, and drew it back with the smallest of smears. He considered his fingertip with distaste. Poudre, peau de pêche, the same shade that marked the ribbon in the music room, the same faint trace on the chair that received the dress. One would say, a lady did these things. One would be wrong. He turned, his eyes mild and bright together. Powder is the most democratic of accomplices. It transfers to the hand that touches the handkerchief that touched the face. It lies on gloves, on a gentleman's lapel, on a cuff brushed by a cheek, offered in congratulation. When it appears everywhere, it belongs to no one. It is a dust thrown in the eyes. Mrs. Penrith's lips tightened. "Are you suggesting a woman could not have done this?" "I am suggesting that someone wished it believed," he said softly. Lady Yverdon gave a short laugh. "And whom do you propose we believe?" "That depends upon whom we desire to protect," Poirot returned, and for once his voice had a bite in it. "The theft does not alter my principal question. It serves only the psychology. When a house is in uproar, a certain kind of man plucks the fruit he has long had his eye upon, telling himself that fate has shaken the branch for him." Jasper looked almost amused. "You do love an orchard, Monsieur Poirot. Shall I list the men of the house for you, or will you begin with the solicitor, since you favour him this afternoon?" "Not the solicitor," Poirot said quietly. "Mr. Vane plants to protect, even when he is wrong to do so. The hand that breaks a lock for money is not the hand that stages a scene to buy a woman freedom." "Then who?" Mr. Grantham demanded harshly. "Let us not say who, but why," Poirot murmured. "The parure belonged to Lady Yverdon's mother. It could be disposed of in London easily by one with gaming debts, or pressed upon a moneylender for a week's grace. The theft yesterday morning gives a man the capital to play saviour or scoundrel as opportunity offers, and after the disappearance he finds he must throw more dust, a bag in the lane, a dress in the snow, a cigar ash. He threads his needle with many colours, hoping one will stitch the seam that keeps him safe. Bravo, Jasper said lightly, but something flickered at the corner of his mouth. It is almost poetry. If you mean me, say so. If you mean Hartley, be brave and risk a bloody nose. Hartley flushed and half-started. Poirot's hand, a mere tilt, set him back in his place. I mean, Poirot said, that after dessert we shall all oblige ourselves with a little experiment in nothing more dangerous than ink. A line is going to be written by each of you. Only a line, E. Lane, and the address of Euston. We will then make a small comparison under a glass. It is a mere pastime, but I have found pastimes amusing. It proves nothing, Mrs. Penrith snapped. Handwriting can be imitated. Perfectly, Poirot agreed. But the imitation leaves traces. The flourish that is too conscious. The capital that is corrected with a sharp stroke. The hesitation before the loop. One writes the way one breathes. Even when one writes with the wrong hand, there is a music one cannot suppress. He rang. The butler brought paper and pens and set them, with the gravity of an altar boy, upon the small escritoire. One by one, under Japp's eye, they wrote, Penrith, painstaking, with a soldier's block. Mr. Grantham, bold with a banker's impatience. Lady Evadne, swift and elegant. Mrs. Penrith, erect little letters like a row of parlour chairs. Hartley, cheerful and sprawling. Mr. Vane, dry and distinguished. Jasper, a languid scrawl that suggested he might not finish if he grew bored. And Lydia, who had come silently at Japp's summons, small precise characters with a modest flourish, flawless, and yet with a single tiny tremor at the tail of the L, as if memory had tugged there. Poirot bent under the lamp with his small glass. He did not hurry. He looked not only at the letters, but at the ink's bite into the paper, at the pressure that darkened a downstroke, at the grain of hesitation in the join between E and period. He said nothing at all for a long minute. When he straightened, I saw an expression in his eyes that I knew well. Not triumph, but the quiet locking of a door that will not be opened again by accident. Japp, he said, you will take Mr. Jasper Grantham aside and look in the lining of his travelling case. And if it is not there, then in the hollow in the leg of his billiard cue. And if it is not there either, then behind the panel at the back of the drawer in his dressing table. The parure setting will be gone, but the pearls, they will be on a length of cotton, rather badly knotted. Jasper's chair went back with a scrape. You damned! He checked himself, laughed with a little gasp in it, and spread his hands. Search away. If you find pearls in my queue, you may keep the queue. Japp did not wait. He jerked his chin at a constable, and they were gone. The silence that followed had a peculiar quality, relief for some, foretaste for others. Lady Evadne stood very straight, her face unreadable. Mr. Grantham's knuckles whitened on the back of a chair. Poirot's gaze moved to Mrs. Penrith, and then to her son. Monsieur Penrith, he said gently, there is yet something for you and for me. The woman you love is safe. She left not to injure you, but to preserve herself. If you pursue with anger, you will not see her again. If you wait and write only once with simplicity, you may yet have happiness, but not a happiness managed by settlements and proud mothers. It must be 2 chairs by a small fire, not a throne and a footstool. The young man's face worked, and to my surprise, Mrs. Penrith looked, for a second, like a woman who had swallowed ice. You presume, she said, but the steel in her voice had dulled. Steps in the corridor. Japp returned, brisk, and set upon the table a small coil of cotton on which lay, pathetic and incontrovertible, a string of pearls. They were pinched between 2 buttons wrapped in tissue. Their soft gleam made the lamplight look cruel. Dressing table drawer panel, Japp said, as advertised. Jasper gave the smallest shrug. I meant to redeem them, he said. After the wedding, after the settlement, after— He smiled suddenly at Lady Yvonne with a mockery that was almost tenderness. After a great many things that were not going to happen unless the world behaved better than it usually does. "You little beast," Lady Yvonne said very quietly. "I am a practical man," Jasper returned. "I saw a season of opportunity approaching. Forgive me for harvesting early. Besides, your mother would have been bored by those pearls on me." Jap's hand descended to his shoulder. He did not resist. He looked at Poirot and tilted his head. "And the writing game?" he asked, with a flippancy that did not quite cover his interest. Poirot's eyes warmed briefly. "A parlour amusement," he said, "but instructive. It told me only what I already knew, that the hand which wrote E. Lane for the clerk in London belonged to a young lady who had practised neatness the way others practice scales. Mademoiselle Lydia, I do not judge you. You chose to be useful, a rare thing, but do not again mistake secrecy for virtue. It is a weed that strangles the truth if you let it grow." Lydia's chin lifted and dipped. One nod, grave, unashamed. Jap led Jasper away. There was a shuffling in the hall, the hush of servants hearing enough to tell the story by morning. Lady Yvonne put out her hand and touched the pearls with a finger that trembled once and then was still. Poirot drew the little blue room's door half to and turned back to the remaining faces. "We are not finished," he said very softly. "The theft is a sideshow. The chief thing is the fear in this house. Fear of the free choice of a young woman. One feared scandal and planted the dress. One feared poverty and planted his fingers where they should not be. One feared loneliness and would have held his son to a bargain that was not love. Such gardens, mes amis, grow nothing worth keeping. Tomorrow morning, when the light is honest, we will gather once more, and the matter of Eleanor Grantham will be ended, not by force, but by clarity. Until then, there will be no telephones used, no messages sent, save one." He turned to Richard Penrith. "You will write to her now, here, in my presence. 10 lines only. You will tell her what you choose and what you do not choose for her. You will use the words I and you, and not we and they, and you will write with your heart and not with your mother's pen. After that, we shall see whether the snow gives back what was taken from it." Penrith looked at him as a drowning man looks at a hand held out. He sat. The scratch of the nib began, halting, then surer, and in the silence of that room, with its broken lock and scattered velvet, I felt, absurdly, that something mended. A sound like a seam drawn tight and made neat under a practised, patient hand. Morning arrived with the fineness of drawn glass. Every twig rhymed, every window a pale mirror. I slept little. There was that sense one has at the end of a campaign, when the tents are still up, but the bugles have already sounded far ahead. At 9:30, the household gathered at Poirot's request in the library. Fires were bright, the silver on the side tables too eager. One felt the room had been dressed for a talk no one wanted to hear. Poirot stood by the hearth, very neat, very composed, hands folded on the silver head of the poker as upon a cane. Jap took a place against the bookcases, with the unblinking patience of an owl on a church beam. Mr. Grantham was heavy-eyed, Lady Yvonne rigid as a standard, Mrs. Penrith alabaster, Penrith himself strangely calm, as if writing his letter had drained from him the last of the frantic energy of pursuit. Lydia sat a little apart, unobtrusive and direct. Vane entered last and stood where he could watch everyone, and be watched by none. "My friends," Poirot said, and the sing-song in his voice made a music of courtesy rather than apology. "We will make the order. When there is confusion and pain, it is sometimes a relief to hear a story told in the right sequence. I beg 2 indulgences only, that you do not interrupt me until I finish, and that when I am done, you will allow the choice of one person to stand without pressure." He glanced toward the south windows, where the yew-walk stood black against the white. "Yesterday at 4:50, the bride goes upstairs. She is calm, not because she is resigned, but because her decision is already made. She will not go to Lausanne. She will go north. She writes upon her blotter certain words: Euston, Sleeping Berth, Ainsworth, then scratches out what is too plain and leaves the echo. She has confided not in a lover, but in a friend, Madame Linden, who has the motor and the courage to carry her away without discussion. At 4:55, 2 ladies leave her room. Mademoiselle Lydia goes first. She goes not to the west door at once. She slips down the little south stair and places upon the terrace, in quick whispering, the woolen shawl. She says the side door will be unlatched. She says also, this I think is true, that she will help to draw the attention elsewhere for a few minutes. She ties the ribbon for the orange blossom hurriedly, left-handed, because she knows she will be asked, and wishes to make a little mistake that points away. She is a good friend, and like many good friends, she believes secrecy a kindness. The maid, Alice, returns in a moment, finds the room empty, and is frightened by her own conscience. We have all known that, yes? She sees the door ajar, the breath of snow upon the mat. She runs to and fro and finds nothing, because there is nothing to find. The little clock on the landing, which has gained, is corrected later. Thus, every honest recollection of time is shifted like a window seen through water. And then, mes amis, the gardener comes, not with spade, but with cunning fingers. Monsieur Vane. He did not look at the man. He simply inclined his head as if naming a fact. Goes to the terrace from the far end. He is pleased, as Lady Evadne says, because his plan runs smoothly. He is not a villain. He is a man who abhors scandal for his clients and thinks, if she is gone, let her be gone beyond any easy calling back. I will make a tableau that says to fathers and policemen, she ran, and buys her 12 hours. So he takes from an ashtray the ash of a Balkan cigarette. Jasper's vice is convenient, and he crumbles a few flecks where they will be found in the train of the gown. He lays the dress with exact care so that from the windows it will be framed like a picture. Later, this same careful hand places, in the lane, a reticule damp with the morning's road salt. He counts upon snow to erase the mechanics and leave only the emotion. Vane's face altered not at all, yet I felt a ripple go through the others, some shock, some reluctant admiration. Poirot's tone did not soften, but it gentled. It was ill-judged, monsieur. The law calls it interference. I call it the sin of cleverness. But I say you did it for a motive not ignoble. Fear that if she were easily found, she would be pulled back into a life decided for her. You will answer for it in your conscience, and perhaps to this very competent inspector. That is one thread. There is a second thread, money of a more banal kind. The morning of the wedding, while the house beat like a drum, someone forced the old lock of the jewel case in the little blue room with the instrument that was to hand. He took the pearls, restrung them roughly on cotton, and hid them in the panel of a dressing-table drawer. He is a man who plays off the future against the present like a gambler changing counters. He waited to be saved by the settlement and by the honeymoon. When those failed him, he made smoke in the garden to fog our eyes. Monsieur Jasper has already accepted that the necklace left by your mother, Lady Evadne, was in his possession. He is charming, he is witty, but he is, alas, a thief. For that there is no theatre, there is only the door. Jasper, if he had wished for a bravura, resisted the temptation. He laughed once, very softly, like a man at the end of a race who sees the tape flutter uselessly. Jap's presence at his shoulder was quiet and final. Poirot lifted a finger. A third thread. Family pride. Madame Penrith, you love your son. You wish for him a wife you can respect and shape. You did nothing criminal. You did something worse to the heart. You managed. Monsieur Grantham, you love your daughter, but you love your arrangements too. You spoke of Lausanne and of trustees, and not once, perhaps, did you ask if the girl wished to walk in the snow of Switzerland, or simply in her own garden for a year without being urged. Do not be affronted. Be corrected. You see where such management leads. To the south stare in the dark, and to a shawl on a terrace. And then, Mademoiselle Lydia. He turned, and in his voice there was something of affection. You acted. You took upon yourself the small lies to protect the great truth. You wrote at Ainsworth for a berth to Inverness to make a decoy. You walked with the straight back of one who thinks, I will be blamed, but it will be worth it. You deserve neither blame nor, what is that English word? Laurel. You deserve to be taken at your value, which is that of a friend who will stand in a draught so another may have warmth. Voila. He let the silence breathe. Snowlight moved on the carpet, then stilled. What remains is the only part that matters, the choice of Mademoiselle Eleanor. She is safe. She has chosen neither a scandal nor an elopement. She has chosen time. Time to think. Time to be regarded as a person and not a portion with a schedule. I have sent a message by hand already. He tapped his breast lightly. Carried last night by the boy of Madame Linden, enclosing a letter written here, in this room, by Monsieur Penrith. I asked for no answer. I asked only that if she wished, she might send one. He looked at the door then, and with a sensation almost theatrical, an absurdity, I confess, I waited as for a cue. It came not with a flourish, but with a small, rapid knock, and the butler entered with an envelope on a salver. He looked, in that moment, like a man who carries a chalice and secures grace thereby. Penrith did not move. It was Poirot who took the envelope, and with no display, handed it to him. C'est à vous. The young man held it a second, as if it were warm. He opened it, read, and the change in his face was a simple human thing, like a shadow passing from a pane. He looked at Poirot. He looked at his mother. He looked at Mr. Grantham. She will meet me, he said quietly, this afternoon at 3 at Mrs. Linden's. Alone, if I wish it. If I do not, she will go on to the coast for a time. She asks only that there be no talk of settlements, no escort, no arrangements. She writes that if I can speak to her as a person and not as a portion, we may begin again. Mrs. Penrith drew breath, as if submerged too long. Lady Yvan's mouth compressed. Mr. Grantham stared at the fire as if it were a tunnel and a train were in it. No one spoke. Poirot inclined his head, and in that movement there was both triumph and humility. Then, mes amis, the affair is ended in the only way that does honour to anyone. The law has its part. He nodded to Jap, who looked as pleased as a cat who has got the cream in its saucer. And the heart has its own. Monsieur Penrith will go at 2:30 in a car with Hastings. Yes, mon ami, I volunteer you. You will talk of the scenery if there is no other safe subject, and he will return or not as the case requires. Meanwhile, there will be no telephones, no messengers, no letters save one that I will myself dictate. Monsieur Grantham, you will write to your daughter a note that says only, I am sorry for what I did not hear. When you wish, come home in your own time. You will send it by the same boy. And then, eh bien, perhaps you will pour away the port for 1 week and drink the tea that is more bitter and better for you. There was a rustle not unlike a laugh and a sob together. It came from Lady Yvain. She drew herself up. For once, Monsieur Poirot, you are almost intolerable, she said, and added, with a small inclination that to my amazement was not unfriendly, and almost right. Jap cleared his throat. As for the rest, I'll be taking Mr. Jasper down to the station, and I'll have a word with Mr. Vane about making tableaux out of other people's lives. Vane spoke for the first time. I am at your disposal, Inspector. He looked at Mr. Grantham then, and something human and unguarded appeared in his face. If it matters, she asked me to help because she believed you would not listen. It is possible you might have. I am sorry I did not let you try. Mr. Grantham made a jerky motion with his hand, as if dismissing a servant and absolving a friend at once. The meaning of it satisfied no one, and sufficed for the moment. Poirot set down the poker, aligned the tongs, and smiled at me with that particular mischief that says his little grey cells, having done their housekeeping, now permit him a joke. You see, Hastings? The snow is a great dramatist, but also a very bad liar. It preserves what one intends to hide, and hides what one intends to preserve. Fortunately, the heart is the better archivist. It keeps the letter one has not yet written, and brings it to the post at the right minute. He turned to the room, gathering them with his eyes. And now, I beg you, go about your business. There will be no more gatherings in this library. The theatre is closed. If happiness comes, it will come as real things do, in small chairs by a modest fire, with no audience. They dispersed, slowly, as people do after church, when they have been told both their sins and their absolution. I felt the air lighten by degrees. When we were alone, I said, "You have done a queer thing, Poirot. Solved a case by making everyone behave better." He patted my arm. "It is the ambition of the moralist, and the despair of the policeman. Do not fear. Jap has his pearls and his prisoner. He is content. And I have a little peace, parce que la jeune fille is not in danger from bodies, only from plans." At 2:30 we took the road again. Penrith sat forward, as if every hedge would turn into a word he needed. The light, already slanting, poured over the white fields with a flotation that made the hedgerows look like black writing on a blank page. As we turned in at Mrs. Linden's, I saw, by the low parlour window, a figure rise and move. Eleanor, the shawl about her shoulders, no longer a bride, not yet anything else but what she was. Penrith's hand gripped mine once without looking, as a man takes balance before stepping from one boat into another. Then he went in. I waited in the car, watching the thin steam of my breath. After a time, 10 minutes or 30, I cannot say, the door opened again, and they stood together, speaking low. They did not touch. They were, I thought, beginning the only honest way people begin who wish to go on, awkwardly and with hope. When at last we drove back toward Highcombe Hall, the snow had taken on that curious blue that comes in late afternoon, and the yew walk, glimpsed at a distance, no longer resembled an avenue to a gallows, but only a path one might walk in any weather if one were properly dressed. Poirot stood at the library window when we returned, and looked out, very grave and very satisfied. "Eh bien," he said, "the affair at the bride who fled in the snow, it is not a crime, Hastings. It is a correction." He drew his moustaches with the tips of his fingers, and added, with that twinkle I confess I cherish, "But if they insist on marrying in January, I shall recommend boots for all parties, and no tableau on the lawn." It was the evening of the following day, when the last threads tied themselves, not in any grand assembly, but in the quiet way things conclude when the air has shifted. The snow had begun to soften, losing its diamond glitter, and there was the faint, almost imperceptible scent of thaw. Highcombe Hall, stripped of the constant coming and going of police boots, of the rustle of servants carrying rumours from one end to the other, seemed to have exhaled. Jap left with Jasper Grantham in custody, the recovered pearls carefully logged and sealed. There had been no grand protest from Jasper, only the sardonic courtesy of a man who knows the game has been lost and intends to lose it with style. "You'll make a story of it, won't you, Hastings?" he'd said to me, with a faint grin as he was led away. "Do put in something flattering." Vane, for his part, was to be spoken to privately by Jap's superiors, an informal censure, Poirot predicted, for his overreach in service of discretion. He had shaken hands with Grantham before leaving, an acknowledgment that might have been forgiveness, or might have been nothing more than the recognition of two men who had seen their plans thwarted in different ways. Lady Yvonne kept mostly to her rooms, though she sent down a message for Poirot that read, in its entirety, "You are still intolerable, but I concede the point." Mrs. Penrith, unexpectedly, requested a moment with me in the corridor, only to say, in a voice stripped of its habitual polish, "You saw her yesterday. Eleanor, was she well?" I told her the truth, that Eleanor had looked as if she could breathe. Mrs. Penrith nodded once, as if that were both answer and reproach enough for herself, and went on without another word. The real conclusion came, not with a flourish of drama, but when Penrith returned from his meeting at Mrs. Linden's. I was in the library with Poirot when he entered. He carried no air of triumph, nor of defeat, only a steadiness that had been absent since we arrived. He looked, quite simply, like a man who had been told the truth and had accepted it. "She won't come back now," he said. "Not yet. She says she wants to decide without feeling cornered. But she read my letter. She smiled, and she said she was willing to see me again in the spring." Poirot inclined his head. "Then, mon cher, you have planted something better than a marriage hastened by duty. You have planted the possibility of choice. That grows slowly, but it grows." Penrith stood for a moment longer, then left us, and I saw in his departure a man going not to arrange or to persuade, but to wait. Poirot crossed to the window. Outside, the yew walk was losing its black and white starkness, the edges blurred where the snow retreated to the grass. He spoke without turning. "You see, Hastings, the truth was not in the footprints, nor in the fibres, nor even in the handwriting. Those were the steps we took to arrive here, yes. But the destination, that was in the hearts. One wished to flee, one wished to shield, one wished to control, and one wished to profit. Remove each motive, and you have the pattern. The bride did not vanish. She simply walked into a life she chose." He looked at me then, and his moustaches twitched into that half-smile that meant the little grey cells had been well fed. "It is not every day, mon ami, that one solves a case by giving it back to the person who started it. The others may call it unfinished. I call it complete." We left Highcombe Hall the next morning. The thaw had gathered in small rivulets along the roadside, and the air smelled faintly of earth beneath the snow. As the car turned out of sight of the house, I looked back once, half expecting to see a white shape on the lawn. There was nothing, only the faint, dark trace of grass returning. Poirot settled into his seat, adjusting his coat. "A most singular affair, Hastings, and it proves a thing I have long believed." "What's that?" I asked. "That the truth, like the snow, may fall in any pattern it pleases, but the heart decides when it will melt." And with that, he closed his eyes, the case of the bride who fled in the snow already stored neatly in the ordered rooms of his mind.